too early?
All right, I got 9:31. Is everybody ready?
I can
Ready.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you the exact date.
Mr. Executive Director, are you ready? I've got 9:31. Mics are already hot.
Yeah.
And it was
All
just
right.
continued to a specific day.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. I have 9:32. This is the Lee County Port Authority Board of Port Commissioners and Airport Special Management Committee joint meeting. It is September 7th, 2023. Welcome, everyone. Let's begin this morning with our invocation. I'd like to ask Pastor David Schmidt from Southside Church of Christ to join us at the podium for today's prayer. Good morning. Good morning. Everyone, please rise.
Blessing to be with you this morning. Let's pray together. Holy Father, creator of all things, you give us all good things. And we sincerely thank you for our lives, for our families, for our friends, for our fellow citizens of this great nation and this beautiful county. Thank you for your care, for your protection, especially during the recent storms, and thank you for being with us during this period of recovery. We all know that human governments are ordained by you, and you hold the hearts of all the leaders in your hands. We know that all authority rests in you alone. Please bless these men and women who've gathered to serve the citizens of Lee County, others who've come to visit us. Please give these leaders wisdom and understanding, courage, compassion. Provide for them a resolve to work together for the best interests of the citizens of Lee County. We pray, Father, that the decisions they make together will always promote fairness and justice, love and peace and moral responsibility. We ask you to bless all those who are in need in our county and use us as citizens to do good for others. Father, thank you for all those who serve us. We ask that you protect the military personnel, law enforcement officers, first responders, and all those who work to keep us safe from harm. We also ask that you bless the members of the Lee County Port Authority, the Airport Special Management Committee, and all those who work so diligently to make it safe and enjoyable for us to travel the skies and visit Southwest Florida. Thank you for your word that guides us in the ways that are right, for the natural beauty of our home here in Lee County, for our peace and our prosperity, and thank you for our freedom. We ask for opportunities today to love each other and to serve others as you have loved us. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. It was very good. Thank you, Pastor. We appreciate you coming today. All right. The first thing on the agenda today is the staff recognition. So at this time, I'd like to ask our Executive Director to take over and introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure for me to recognize a couple of our employees today. And first, I'd like to recognize James Furiosi. James, if you are here and could stand up for me, thank you. James Furiosi, our Director of Maintenance, was recently selected at the Florida Airport's annual conference in July to serve on the Executive Committee as the Secretary-Treasurer of this board. James has been very active with the Florida Airports Council, which is the official organization of over 100 commercial airports and general aviation airports in Florida. And I just want to thank James for his continued active participation in this great organization and congratulate him on the selection of being on the board. So thank you, James. Secondly, I'd like to recognize our chief of our airport rescue and firefighting. Tracy, if you could stand up, please. Thanks. Chief Tracy Young was recently unanimously reconfirmed by the Commission on Professional Credentialing as Chief Fire Officer. This is a very distinguished designation and confirms Chief Young as the knowledge and skills and abilities required for the fire and emergency services profession. He is one of only 1,833 internationally fire chiefs to get this credentialing. So I'd just like to congratulate our chief on a great job. Thank you, Tracy. Only two recognitions I have today.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. Excellent. At this time, then, we'll take up the consent agenda. I'd like to ask Commissioner Greenwell, do you have any items that you'd like to pull for discussion?
I do not.
Commissioner Pendergrass?
I do not.
I have none. Commissioner Sandell?
Nope.
Commissioner Ruane?
I do not.
Okay, so there are no items that have been pulled for discussion. Do we have a motion to approve the balance
So
of the?
moved.
Okay, motion from Commissioner Ruane and the seconds from Commissioner Sandelli. At this time, I'd like to ask for public comment on the consent agenda. Would anybody wish to speak in public comment on any of the consent agenda items today? Okay, I see no public comment, so at this time, we'll come back to the board. Is there any discussion? Okay, I see no discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. We'll move to the administrative agenda. The first item on the administrative agenda is item A23. So I'll ask Mr. Executive Director Siegel to introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 23, request the board approve contract with CDW Government for pricing of computer and technology items, and I'd ask Mr. McGonigal to further explain the item.
Thank you. Brian McGonigal, good morning, everybody. Yes, CDW is a current contract that we use now. We're renewing it. This is where we buy all of our IT equipment and printers and all the computers at the gate, down at the airline gates. It's a very convenient contract. We negotiated price with them through February of 2024 and plus an additional year. We're also, and by the way, if there's any one item over $100,000, we'll bring that back to you. But this is a very convenient catalog of items that we can just buy in preferred pricing. And another thing that we're requesting here is the purchase of 8 video walls. These video walls will be down in bag claim on the wall, on the back wall. We're replacing them. These video walls are $347,000 with contingency, 8 of them. So we're asking for approval of that item too, commissioners.
Excellent. Commissioners, do you have any questions on the items? Okay, no questions on the item. At this time, let me call for public comment on item 23 on the administrative agenda. Has anyone come to speak on this item? Okay, I see no speakers, so we'll come back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Move item. Second.
Okay, motions from Commissioner Pendergrass and the seconds from Commissioner Ruane. Any discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. Mr. Siegel, please introduce item 24.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 24, request the board approve a contract with Olson Estes as for our third concession package at the International Airport, and I'd ask Mr. McGonigal to further explain this item as well.
Yeah, thank you. As Ben mentioned, this is the third package, the third food and beverage and retail. If you recall, we extended Host and Parodies out to 2035. We went on the street. The board selected Olson Estes back in May. This is their negotiated contract in front of you today. It has the same terms as Host and Parodies out to 2035. This is the smallest of the 3 packages. They're going to have a 9,900 square foot food hall with 4 units in there. They're also going to have a standalone Italian restaurant of 2,500 square feet and 3 retail units. So the members of Olson Estes are here today should you have any questions, but they've been really great to deal with. So we're looking forward to work with them.
Excellent. Do we have any questions, commissioners? Just one question on behalf of my kids. Can you reveal any of the food hall restaurants yet?
In their presentation, they had Chick-fil-A, Playa Bowls, Asian Eats, right? And they're working on the 4th concept, which would be some Lee County local brand that yet to be announced.
So definitely the moms and dads and traveling public will love hearing about the Chick-fil-A. So
And the employees too.
And
absolutely,
grandkids.
absolutely, and grandkids, absolutely.
Don't fly on Sunday.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, if there are no further questions, then we'll go to public comment. Does anybody wish to speak in public comment on the item? Okay, I see no speakers, so back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll move it.
Okay, motion I heard from Commissioner Greenwell, and I heard Commissioner Ruane. Would you like to make the second then?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So Commissioner Greenwell gets the motion for approval. Commissioner Ruane gets the second. Any discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries
you.
unanimously. Mr. Siegel, please introduce item 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 25, request the board an agreement with Kone for maintenance of our elevators and escalators, and I'd ask Mr. Hennigan to further explain this item.
Good morning, Stephen Hennigan for the record. Agenda item 25, request board approve a piggyback agreement with Kone utilizing pricing from the city of Kansas City for elevator and escalator maintenance and services. This is the current provider that we have been using at RSW. This contract will allow for purchase of preventative maintenance, repairs, services, and projects as needed throughout the terms of the agreement, which currently runs through 2024, but there are renewals and extensions associated with it.
Okay, any questions on this item, commissioners? Okay, I see no questions. Would anybody like to speak in public comment on item 25? Okay, I see no speakers. Back to the board. Somebody like to make a motion?
Move item.
Motion for approval from Commissioner Pendergrass, second from Commissioner Sandelli. Is there any discussion on this item? I see no discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. And I believe, yeah, we have a couple more. Please introduce item 26.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Item 26, request the board approval of the purchase of 14 vehicles as part of our fiscal year 24 replacement plan, and I'd ask Mr. Hennigan to further explain this item as well.
Agenda item 26 requests board approval to purchase up to 14 vehicles per the FY 23-24 vehicle replacement plan. That's going to be an estimated cost of $974,000, including a 15% contingency for an estimated total cost of approximately $1.1 million. And this is pending the approval of our FY 23-24 budget. We also request board to authorize the executive director to purchase vehicles on an as-available basis with variations in make, model, package, option, and price, all limited to that total cost estimate.
Commissioners, any questions on this item? Okay, I see no questions. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on item 26? Okay, I see no speakers. Back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll move the item.
Okay, motion from Commissioner Ruane, second from Commissioner Sandelli. Any discussion on this item? Okay, I see no discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. And we have one more on the administrative agenda. It's item 27.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 27, request the board approve a federal grant to help pay for the rehabilitation of our roads over on the north side of the airport. And I would ask Emily Underhill to please explain this item further.
Good morning, everyone. Emily Underhill for the record. This agenda item is seeking approval to accept an FAA bipartisan infrastructure law airport infrastructure grant. The grant is an allocated amount through a fiscal year 22 distribution and will be used for eligible costs under the RSW Rehabilitation of Roads project that is realigning and rehabbing Chamberlain Parkway and the airport's perimeter road. This money supplements another grant in the amount of $4.2 million that was previously received from the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. The project is currently underway and is expected to be completed in April of 2024. Staff is recommending approval accepting this grant in the amount of $8,732,164.
Okay, commissioners, any questions on this item? Okay, I see no questions. At this time, we'll move to public comment on item 27. Has anyone come to speak on in public comment on this item? Okay, I see no speakers, so back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion? Commissioner Sandelli makes a motion for approval and Commissioner Pendergrass seconds it. Is there any discussion on this? All right, are there any objections? No objections, that motion carries unanimously. All right, that concludes the administrative agenda. At this time, I would like to announce that we will now convene as the Board of County Commissioners. So we are now convened as the Board of County Commissioners, and I think, Ms. Frazier, would you like to introduce item 28?
Yes, this is an ordinance amendment that was continued specifically from June 29th to the specific date of today. This ordinance amendment would amend Ordinance 9409 and will establish and provide regulations for a customer facility charge applicable to all rental car companies.
Very good. Any questions at this time, commissioners? Okay, I see no questions. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing then for item number 28. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on this item? Okay, I see no speakers, so we'll close the public hearing then and come back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to move it.
Motion for approval from Commissioner Greenwell. We have a second. Second from Commissioner Sandelli. Do we have any discussion on this item at all? Okay, I see no further discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. And at this time, I would like to announce that we are reconvening as the Board of Port Commissioners. So we are now reconvened as the Board of Port Commissioners for commissioner items. Commissioner Greenwell, do you have any items today?
I do not.
Commissioner Pendergrass?
I just have some kind words to express to our airport manager here. I attended a few weeks ago, and you did too, Chairman, the Elaine McLaughlin PDCBCV Awards, Hospitality Awards, and I'd like to recognize how many employees from RSW got recognized for that. And obviously, hospitality and customer service is obviously a priority here. So thank you, Ben, you or your agency, and I think the police department received the highest distinguished award that day.
Yes.
In customer service. So it's really great to see that our frontline men and women are out there providing that customer service. So that's something our visitors here really appreciate, and I know that's what we're known for here at RSW, having the nicest, cleanest, and most friendliest airports. So again, thank you to all your staff, and congratulations to all your employees.
Yeah, well, I'll pass that along to him as well. Thank you.
Amen. Okay, I have no items. Commissioner Sandelli, any items?
No, I'm good.
Commissioner Ruane?
No, sir.
Okay, let's move on to committee appointments. Does anyone have any committee appointments they need to make today? Okay,
Nope.
I see none. So we'll move forward to comments from the chair of the Airport Special Management Committee. I don't know if our chair's here,
No.
but who would like to speak? How about-
We, well, yeah,
Fran?
we have a couple of people sick and we have a couple of people traveling, so sorry, this is all you get this morning. No, I don't have anything other than we continue to rake through all the things that we do here at the airport and have a lot of exciting things going on, so thank you very much.
We appreciate all the advice and review that you guys provide for us too. Mr. Cameron, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm enjoying what I'm doing.
Very good.
Very good.
All right, so we'll turn to the executive director comments, and you're recognized, Mr. Siegel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In lieu of my general remarks today, I'd like to talk a little bit about air service, something that I don't think talk a whole lot about during our board meetings, and I thought it would be appropriate to maybe update the board on air service, what's going on, not just in the industry, but what we can expect during this upcoming season. So with that, I've invited Brad DeFiore, who is with Alevon Pacific, to present an air service update. He's our consultant that works with us on air service. And afterwards, after he does a presentation, it'll be a brief presentation, about 10 minutes. Obviously, we're happy to answer any questions about the industry and what we are expecting for the winter season here at RSW. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm happy to be here. My name is Brad DeFiore. I am the Managing Director of Alevon Pacific Aviation Consulting. We're a specialty air service development consulting firm. So this is all we do is we're sort of the middleman between airports and airlines in negotiating and making business cases for additional service. So we work with the air service development team here at the airport, and we've been, I think, for a couple of years now, we've been in that role. Of course, the last couple of years have been kind of crazy in the air service world, and things are starting to settle down a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where the industry is right now as a whole and how that relates directly to RSW. This is we just came across this headline the other day and I thought it was really appropriate. Right now is a really good time for the airline industry after a really rough few years. Obviously, with the pandemic, that was a life or death scenario for the industry. Industry pulled through, and on a global level, airlines are performing at a really high, at a high level right now. And that's the last three statements in that subheadline there are really important because of strong demand, high fares, and relatively low fuel prices. That's where we have been for the last year or so. However, we're starting to see some changes in some of these factors. Fuel prices have become a little volatile. You can see prior to the pandemic, they were pretty cheap. Fuel was at really low level prices, and so the industry was performing very well from a profitability standpoint. During the pandemic, they started to rise. It really got up to $4.12 a gallon in the summer of 2022. It's been sort of an up and down roller coaster. We're starting to see an uptick again. The Saudis and the Russians have cut production. They've signaled that they're going to moving forward, so we expect fuel prices to rise. Rising fuel prices are not great for the industry, as you can imagine, and so that is definitely going to be something that's going to be tempering capacity growth. Another thing that's really been impacting the industry lately is the lack of new capacity being added into the system, and there's been a lot of issues with supply chain. And Boeing, probably heard some of the issues that Boeing has had in recent years. The Airbus is behind in deliveries. So really what's happened is the growth has been continuing from a demand perspective, kind of unabatedly. It's been growing very fast, but the ability of the industry to accommodate that growth has been limited. The lack of aircraft, and not just aircraft, maintenance. There's parts that aren't available because of supply chain issues and workforces that were cut during the pandemic, expertise that left all these companies, and so there's a lot of aircraft that are out of service right now because they can't fly because they don't have the parts they need. So that has been a persistent issue recently in terms of capacity. Probably the biggest issue, and I'm sure you've heard about this, is this global pilot shortage we're having. It doesn't impact Fort Myers in the same way it impacts a lot of other markets. It really hits the small markets hard because the career progression of pilots is usually start out on a small regional jet and you work your way up to the big airplanes. And so the regional jet, that part of the industry has really been hurt hard, and that means that small markets, 500,000 people in a MSA, those markets have really lost a lot of service. Fort Myers doesn't really have much in the way of regional jets. You can fill big planes, so we haven't really seen that dynamic play out here, but it does play out in the rest of the industry. And when you have a limited supply of pilots, there's a limited amount of flying that you can do. So ultimately, in the big picture, it does affect this airport, but it's not as damaging here as it is in a lot of other places. Now, what that pilot shortage does is give pilot unions a lot of leverage. And we've seen just some massive pay increases happen just recently. American pilots just ratified their new contract. Delta did earlier in the year. They add about almost $2 billion in annual expenses to airlines' bottom line, just in pilot salaries and in pay. To give you some perspective of how that affects the industry, I look particularly at the American bars there on the right. In 2019, Americans' net earnings were $1.7 billion. So this pilot contract would have wiped out all of their profits in that year. Obviously not all airlines are the same, but it is going to be a significant factor. And this is really true across all labor groups within the airline industry. So yet another thing that's going to temper growth. Because of all of these factors, the lack of supply and the incredibly high demand we've been seeing airfares rise to kind of heights we've never seen before. You can see prior to the pandemic in June of 2019, the average US domestic one-way fare was $173. In April 2023, earlier this year, was almost $200. It's still staying up about that same level. We're starting to see demand recede a little bit. So these fares have moderated somewhat, but you can see, I don't know if you can read that on the left, but as a part of the whole travel category, airfares are the highest or the fastest growing expense item, almost up 20% year over year. So airfare is taking out a bigger portion of the travel dollar than it used to. And the other kind of major factor that's happening is sort of at the government level. The FAA is having a severe shortage of air traffic controllers. It's hard to recruit air traffic controllers. It's very difficult to train them. So this is a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon. It's been building for years. Everybody knows it's a problem. Everybody kind of knows what the solutions are, I think, but it just takes a long time to train more controllers. There's new FAA authorization that it's not passed yet, but that will include hopefully some new tools to deal with this. So that's, it's funny because we're in a great time for the airline industry, but all that sounds pretty negative. That's the airline industry. There's always something around the corner that's, some impending doom, no matter how good things are. A lot of times it never plays out or it doesn't play out the way we think it is. But overall, those are the challenges that we're facing. Now, Fort Myers is different. Coming out of the pandemic, well, in the middle of the pandemic, really was one of the fastest, in some periods it was the fastest recovering airport in the country. During the summer of 2021, the airport had recovered 167% of its pre-pandemic capacity, which is pretty good. And it stayed all the way above that line, well above 100% of recovery until Ian, and obviously dipped below, down to in the 80s. In this time frame, I think what happened as well is that the airlines cut too much. And I talked to some of them during the time, and they knew they had, but they had to make decisions really quick. And then once they've made the decision, they're sort of stuck with that for several months. And so they cut too far. And what we saw, I think, was demand didn't really decrease as much as the capacity did. And so we did see rising fares in that time period here in the market. And so I think there's been some headlines recently about how fares rose. If you look at that, it correlates pretty much directly to this time period. And so now we're back into this period of growth again, well exceeding the pre-pandemic levels, up to 129% in August of what it was in August of 2019. So back growing again, kind of no real concerns here at all. To give you some perspective on how Fort Myers compares to the rest of the country, the light blue bars there are the average U.S. Domestic seats relative to the same month in 2019. So if we come all the way out to August 23, as a whole, the U.S. is 102% recovered from the pre-pandemic levels. So it's about flat. We're pretty much fully recovered across the board. Fort Myers is 129% recovered. So just far outstripping. It was just like a boom that didn't really recede. So really good shape compared to the rest of the industry. A lot of this growth looks like it's going to stick. So I think we're maybe at a new level here that we'll probably maintain. To give you some perspective where that ranks, RSW is now the 42nd. I won't say busiest because this is really a little bit confusing. This is TSA throughput. This is passengers going through TSA checkpoints. So this includes some employees and such, but basically what it does is it gives you a sense of how many people are local passengers. You compare with all these other airports. It doesn't include connections because you only go through TSA when you start your trip. So you'll notice that Atlanta, for example, is not number 1 on this list. It's number 5. But relatively speaking, right there in the midst of a whole bunch of airports around the same size, I would suspect that we're going to pass a few of these here in the next few years and probably get up into the 30s pretty easily. Now, all that additional capacity has led to improved traffic as well. So these are employments. And you see, the projection was in July 23, earlier this year, to have about almost 350,000 estimated employments. If you look at that red dotted line all the way across, you can see that that's kind of well above, except for that peak 2021 period, it's above where we have been. So the traffic is elevating kind of across the board. One thing you'll notice is that the seasonality of the market is pretty intense. It's one of the most seasonal large airports in the country. So over time, one of the ways that I think we work to develop more growth at the airport is trying to especially extend the shoulder seasons. Going further into the late spring and then starting stuff earlier in the fall. It's hard to train people to do that. It's a little bit easier than it used to be though, because now we have a situation where people have a lot more flexibility of when and where they work. And they're a lot more open to traveling at non-traditional time periods, days of the week, times of the day, all that kind of thing. So if we look specifically at some metrics here at the airport in general, the big 4 carriers really dominate air service. 65% of the seats are provided by Delta, Southwest, United, and American. And that's pretty strong for a leisure market. That service is going to be the most reliable, not in an operation sense, but it's going to be 7 days a week normally. It's going to be consistent. It's going to have all your hubs, that sort of thing. So that's sort of the backbone, the bread and butter of the market. And then if you look at the light blue, those are the low-cost carriers and ultra low-cost carriers for the most part. And they've been growing very fast, but they still, they just have fewer seats because they have fewer flights a day. A lot of this service is twice a week, type of service. But that is the fastest growing segment of the industry is the low-cost segment. Market share, very diverse. Not many airports have this sort of balance in their offering. So there's really no concerns about somebody dominating or anything like that. One of the, like I was saying, the ultra low cost carriers, one of the great things about them is that they're growing very fast, and they have the ability to come in and surgically target the right markets at the right days of the week, maybe at the right times, not always at the right times, but they can come in and just put the right amount of capacity in a market. So you look at all the markets that Breeze announced a couple weeks ago that are starting in November. There's 9 of them on there. I think there might be some additional ones popping up soon. Most of those are twice a week. So, Norfolk, twice a week. Those are markets that never would have existed before. Network carriers are never going to fly those. You're not going to see Delta flying to Norfolk or Pittsburgh from here. But what you do have is you have the ability to create new demand because people want to fly nonstop. And so if you don't have nonstop from, say, Pittsburgh, and all of a sudden you get nonstop from Pittsburgh, a lot of people are going to choose to come here that would not have otherwise. So really, this type of service is key to unlocking a lot of new demand that didn't exist before. So this is pretty great. The Breeze, Frontier, and Spirit, those are all ultra low cost carriers. We've got 2 new flights, 2 new carriers to Toronto. Lynx, which is a startup ULCC in Canada, and Porter, which has been around for a number of years as a turboprop carrier operating out of the Toronto Billy Bishop Island Airport and regional flights, and now they've got jets. And they're flying out of Pearson Airport, the international airport there. So 2 new Toronto services. I think that makes 4 from Toronto. So a lot of competition in that market. We'll see how that goes. And then JetBlue added Worcester, Massachusetts on a less than daily service as well. So if we look out, all of that just means more capacity. So, all the stuff I said in the beginning about how the industry is, facing all these headwinds, they don't seem to be affecting RSW. We're anticipating significant growth continuing. This is the January, the dark blue is versus 2019. The light blue will be versus 2023. So this is January 24, February, March 24. So you can see up 30% or so for January and February. March will be probably even higher than that, but all the schedules are not yet loaded for March. So they're not all represented in there, but I would expect it's going to be around 130% as well. So the growth is continuing here pretty much unabated. The biggest challenge, I think, is going to be the facility needs, just being able to accommodate the growth. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, what questions do you have?
Great information. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I was going to say also thank you to my colleagues for the last few years standing strong, because these numbers reflect what we did here in local policy. I will share with you actual personal experience. I met a couple that moved here because they relocated from Massachusetts. They had bought a home in the city of Mars. They had contacted my office because they called about utilities. But their story was, the true story, I guess, they were in Massachusetts. Their flight to Tampa was delayed. They were literally moving from Massachusetts back, I think it was June of 21, and just to get away from Massachusetts. And their flight to Tampa got canceled. And they're like, what are we going to do? We got to go. Everything's done. The house is sold. And they said, they were watching. They said, but not my choice. But CNN was on. It was on the TV, and they were running a story about what we're doing in Lee County. They were running a story about off the Oaks and Naples, and they said, we want to go there. So thanks to CNN story, they Googled. They said RSW, and they had flights going out 2 hours later through Atlanta, of course, and so we know they're flying Delta, and they flew here, and basically off the plane and went to Arborwood and bought a home because of the news story they saw. So thank goodness for them giving us national publicity on that. But them and thousands of other people obviously saw those stories and do our policy decision. And the gentleman was actually saying, I haven't played golf in a year. I want to start playing golf. And he saw the other story. We Googled Lee County that our golf courses were open and people on the East Coast was coming here for golf. So it's the best of both worlds. They said they got off the airplane here, never been here before, never came here, and they moved here. And they said, but they thought it was another world. They said we could got off. These people with nice pink shirts met us. Yeah. People were nice. It was clean. It was bright. And they said we thought we left hell and came to heaven. That was the guy's exact words. He said, but now we're not happy in my water. But anyway, there was a true story though about how this couple moved here from Massachusetts because of the national publicity we got, and I didn't really think nobody else was really watching us that closely, but people were seeing the stories, and it obviously reflects on those numbers that people came here because local and state policies is set in place. We obviously wanted to protect each other and do whatever, but we didn't. They chose to move here because of that.
One of the things you'll find is interesting because, historically, RSW had really good hub service. 7 days a week, Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, New York, maybe, but didn't have all these smaller markets. And what's interesting is, what happened up the road with Punta Gorda with Allegiant really opened a lot of eyes. It's not just at Punta, it's all over the place. Allegiant really changed the way that airline business models operate for the leisure market. And they said, we can't operate 7 days a week from these markets. There's not enough demand. Nobody wants to fly on a Tuesday to go to Florida. And so they figured out how to serve these smaller markets where we know people come to Florida, but they might have been connecting over Atlanta, or maybe they come once a year and they stay, even snowbirds, they come down, they stay, and then they go back at the end of the season. Well, what Allegiant discovered is if you make nonstop service available at an affordable fare on the days a week people want to go, they start doing it a lot more. And that opened the eyes of the Breeze and the Avellos of the world. Frontier and Spirit kind of do the same thing. And that opened up the connectivity to all these smaller markets that provide brand new growth. Because what happens is if you live in Grand Rapids, I'm from Grand Rapids originally, and did not have Fort Myers service. But as many of you probably know, there's a lot of people from Michigan in this region, right? And they used to have to fly to Atlanta and connect. Well, Frontier starts flying Fort Myers, and all of a sudden, people are just flocking to it. People who wouldn't have come down at all now maybe are coming down once, and maybe their family are coming down twice. It just unlocks so much demand. And so that's what a lot of this growth that we're seeing is these new business models that work better for that type of traveler. So you've got the kind of the best of both worlds. You have the network carriers providing, that reliable, high-level service, business, more appropriate for business travel, that sort of thing. But then you have this other product for, the visitors, and making, it works out for people who live here as well, because now you have affordable options to go to all these places. So it's kind of a win-win.
Mr. Sandelli?
Two things. One is we talk about airplanes, we talk about capacity and those type of things, but the experience here, and I want to just again congratulate Ben and the whole team, because customer service is always at the top of our list, and that goes to what Cecil said there. The other question though is I moved from the Northwest. I lived up there for quite a while. Is the 737 MAX, has that cleared all the hurdles?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Dash 8 MAX, which is the one that's flying today, is basically they're all good with that. I don't think anybody. They went through the most rigorous process that's ever existed in terms of getting it recertified. I don't think anybody's concerned about that airplane. There's two new versions, the Dash 7 and the Dash 10, that are still going through the certification process. But yeah, the MAX will be fine, and it's a super efficient plane, especially the Dash 8. So airlines love it.
May get some dividends again in the future?
What's that?
May get some Boeing dividends again?
Yeah. Well,
No, don't go there.
I'm definitely not going to go out and say that, because Boeing will find a way to.
I love Boeing.
Yeah.
So good to hear that, though. Thank you.
One more question from Commissioner
I have
Pinnick.
a question. So I know you covered about the pilot shortage. I know it's been long gone over the last 10, 20 years because military's cut back over the last 20 years. So you see less
But and
pilots
also
around.
demand. There's increased
Demand's
needs. The
increased.
military, even if it didn't have that, would never have enough.
Right, because there's
Doing
obviously
training
more
enough
population, more planes.
Yeah.
But over the years, those airlines have cut back on smaller planes
Mhm.
too because of seats. We've seen that here. RSW, the smaller planes have less seats, so they do that. But do you see two pilots per one plane, two pilots per plane, either 120 seats or 300?
You got it.
You think they're going to start going back to larger planes again?
Yeah,
if there's a pilot?
It's already happening.
It has to happen. That's one way they fix that.
It's a big problem for the industry, because what it's doing is basically, if you hadn't have actually said that yourself, I was about to say that.
Right.
You have two pilots, you can put 250 passengers on an airplane, or you can put 50 passengers on an airplane.
Right.
And the pilots aren't going to get paid that much different.
Right.
Because there's so few of them, they've negotiated these contracts that are so rich. So if you're an airline, why would you invest in a small airplane?
Just put them on a bigger
Doesn't
plane.
make any sense,
Are
right?
are the pilots trying to negotiate less restrictions, like as far as restrictions for them as far as flight time and also like age?
Oh, they've negotiated like, I mean, they're living the dream right now, basically. They've negotiated.
You think maybe Commissioner Sindelli could go back flying again? What do you think?
I mean,
Fly for the Navy, but
Yeah.
if you're gonna take a 75-year-old,
Yeah.
There he is, right there. I'm flying with that guy.
They've got the best work rules. I mean, they are, if you've got kids, grandkids, they're trying to figure out what they want to do in life, pilot's what they want to do in life, because that's like gold. It's
We know people
guaranteed,
doing that.
basically, yeah. No, and the problem with the small airplane situation is what that does is that draws, if you can't fly small airplanes, a lot of small and mid-sized communities, like I was saying earlier, just are left without it. So where they used to be able to fly to a hub to make connections, now they've got to drive. So they've got to drive 2 hours to whatever maybe the nearest big airport is. It's really, I don't think the country's kind of come to terms yet with how bad it's going to be. There's a lot of people in the industry that understand how bad it is going to be for small communities. A lot of them, I think we have like 72, there's been 72 market exits from airlines leaving cities completely since the pandemic. You know, some cities have lost all of their service. Some of them have lost 2 of their 3 carriers, that sort of thing. So it doesn't really impact Fort Myers though, from what I was saying earlier, because you guys could support these big airplanes. And there's just a lot of demand here. And so, you know, airlines have been flocking. And I don't think that's gonna change, not in any radical way. The growth is gonna slow down at some point, but.
Yes, Mr. Cameron.
What impact is the boom gonna have?
Supersonic?
Specifically RSW and then the industry in general.
You're talking about the aircraft manufacturers trying to build
Yeah, I don't know how much
Yeah.
of the runway they need. We got 12,000 feet.
They gotta get an engine first. There's a lot of skepticism on that project. The problem with a supersonic airplane is you're not legally allowed to fly over land.
It's supersonic.
Yeah, right, it's supersonic, right. So what that does is it kind of limits the effectiveness to mainly coastal markets. And then the airplane's only gonna have a range of roughly 4,000 miles, which would not get you, for example, from here to Europe. So it's gonna, because of the size of the airplane and the expense, it's gonna be very, very high ticket prices. There's a lot of people that are really enthused about the idea, and there's a lot of people that are very skeptical about it. And so I don't think it's gonna, I'd like to see them actually develop an engine that is going to work. They're trying to do it on their own, basically, and they're a startup. You know, if Boeing or Airbus was doing this, it would be still challenging, but they're a startup. And so I'm reasonably skeptical that it's ever gonna actually come to fruition, but they're building a plant in Greensboro, North Carolina right now, and they've got some big investors, and they've got, you know, the technology might be there. The question is gonna be whether the economics is there. The economics is really, really challenging on supersonic flight, which is part of the reason we don't have any supersonic airplanes today.
Hey, we've come a long way since the days of the Concorde.
Yep.
I flew in the Concorde, and it was London to New York was 3 hours and 20 minutes, which I thought was pretty
Yeah.
cool. At Mach 2 plus.
Yeah, and the thing is, even the Concorde, as expensive as it was still subsidized by the government. Like, yeah, it was not, there's never been a profitable supersonic operation. And the challenge is it's a huge investment to develop these airplanes, but there's such a limited window. I mean, basically, they could operate like New York to London, but at 4,000 miles, you're just barely getting from the Northeast to Europe. And so it really limits it. And then you got people, let me ask you a question. Would you rather be in an airplane that had small sort of, not Concorde, it'll be better than the Concorde seats. And would you rather pay, you know, $4,000 to fly that and get there in 3.5 hours? Or would you rather have a lie flat bed and have, you know, a 6-hour flight, 7-hour flight? That's gonna be the problem that they're up against, because people, it's overnight anyway. You don't want to arrive in London at 4 a.m., you know. There's a lot of challenges to that model, I think.
Okay. Well, that was an amazing presentation. I enjoyed it. I don't know that we've ever had that level of detail on an air service presentation in the time I've been here. So thank you very much for
Yeah.
giving us that opportunity to look at what the future forecasting of our market looks like. So thank you very
My
much.
pleasure, Commissioner. Thank you.
And if there's no further questions, then we'll go ahead and toss it back to the executive director. Anything else on the executive director items?
No, I would like to just thank Vicky and her team, Carol Obermeyer and Brian Solis. They're the ones that are out there kind of beating down the doors and, working on getting that new air service and certainly helped put together this presentation. So I'd like to thank them as well. But that's all I had, Mr. Chair. So I'm good.
Excellent.
you.
Thanks again. Great presentation.
Yeah, sure.
Really, really good. Okay, on to port attorney items. Ms. Frazier?
No items.
No items. Okay, very good. Someday they're going to surprise us and say there's something big happening. No, I don't know. Maybe. I actually hope not. Not from the legal team.
Yeah.
All right. At this time, we will open the floor for public comment on matters that were not on the agenda today. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on anything that was not on the agenda today? All right. I see no comments. So seeing no further business before us, we will adjourn the Port Authority board meeting. And we will go ahead and just go right into the workshop, Mr. Siegel, if that's okay.
Sure.
So we'll now convene the board's workshop. And Mr. Siegel, please introduce the item.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So today, what we'd like to do is brief the board on where we're at on this Concourse E design effort. We're at 50% design. We've made a lot of progress, and would like to get some feedback from the board on some of the design elements at this stage. And without further ado, I think I'd like to just turn it over to Mr. Fisher to kick off this workshop. And please don't hesitate to ask questions along the way. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark.
Good morning. For the record, Mark Fisher. Back in 2022, based on recommendations identified in the RSW Master Plan update, we started the design to add 14 gates to the RSW Passenger Terminal Complex that would accommodate activity levels for passengers and flights in the peak month of March of 2036. We came back to the board this past January, and as a result of cost increases and some funding limitations, recommended to phase the project. First phase to construct 8 gates, and then a second phase to add 6 gates, both completed in time for the original goal of the 2036 peak season. So as been mentioned today, we're here at the 50% design milestone. So I'd like to introduce Darren Larson, the project manager with Atkins, the lead design firm for the design phase effort, to give you a quick overview of where we stand on the project and our plans moving forward, and answer any questions and address any comments you may have as we proceed with the design. Darren?
Morning.
Good morning. For the record, Darren Larson with Atkins. And as Mark said, I'm going to provide an update on the design here when we're at the 50% mark here. So I want to start with a few of the high-level design objectives we had when we started the process. And first and foremost was to meet the demand that we see RSW having in March of 2036, which would require 14 additional gates. Second of all, make sure that we maintain that high level of service and great passenger experience that people are used to here at RSW, but also remain mindful of cost and keep the cost as efficient and low as possible. And then finally, make it fit with the existing terminal architecture and operations. We don't want to do something dramatically different. We want it to look like it belongs as part of the terminal building that exists today. As Mr. Fisher just said, we talked about how we're going to divide the project into 2 basic phases. The 8 gates, which is a majority of the project, and that satisfies the demand through 2031. And then an additional 6 gates in a later phase that would take care of the remaining demand to get us to 2036. So today I'm going to walk through the design and basically those 2 phases. First of all, I'll talk through the 8-gate portion of the project and how that looks in terms of schedule and budget, and then I'll follow that with what the remaining 6 gates will look like. And as I walk through a series of images, I wanted to point out that there's a key map that you'll see on every slide, and it's this portion of the expanded terminal, and you'll see little red arrows in this box that sort of give you a view, the context of the view that you're looking at in the image. So as an example, here's the front door. This is what you know, the two main doors we have in the terminal today are doors number 2 and 5. This will be door number 8 in the expanded terminal as you go around the curve. As you come through the front door, you're going to see an atrium that looks a lot like the 2 atriums we have in the terminal today, especially once we complete this phase 1 project for the consolidated checkpoint. And as you look down the ticket counters, again, looks a lot like the existing terminal. And then as you move into the atrium, point out, similar to the way the terminal will look at the completion of phase 1, you'll have the entrance to the security checkpoint to the side. And at the end of the atrium is the exit for passengers, you know, leaving the secure side of the terminal. This is a view of what the security checkpoint should look like with the queuing area below, and then the security screening process equipment as you look through the checkpoint there. Another view of the equipment, and I'd like to point out that the exact equipment that we will receive from TSA will depend on what TSA is providing at the time, and we don't know for sure exactly what that will be, but we're planning for the largest equipment that they currently have anticipated in their procurement process, so we'll be able to handle whatever they decide to provide. And also, you'll see here, there's a total of 9 lanes. Now, that's enough to handle the ultimate capacity of this concourse, which is 19 gates. When we open with just 8 gates, there's a good chance we won't have all of these security lanes in place on day 1. Another view of the security checkpoint, this time looking from the end back towards as you would come through the screening process. And you see there's plenty of room for people to recompose and get their belongings put back together. As you exit the checkpoint, this is an important feature, and you'll actually be able to turn to the right and follow this pathway back to existing Concourse D. And the connection is right in the vicinity of where the gate D2 hold room is today. So we'll start, let's take a walk to the right first, as if you were going to go back towards Concourse D. And this gives you the ability to connect to all of the existing concourses, B, C, and D. So this is what the view would be looking at walking back towards Concourse D. And the first thing you would come to is the exit lanes back into the atrium. And then ahead here on the right, you can see there's a space that's been set up for a concession, as well as the potential to add another passenger lounge or an airline lounge. So this is the view now looking, if you were standing in the gate D2 hold room, looking back towards the expansion. And so this area that I was talking about on the left, this is where that airline lounge would be. And you can walk forward now towards Concourse E. And so this is the view now if you had come out of the security checkpoint looking towards Concourse E. And around the corner from that is a concessions court. So if you remember the project that we're currently doing, phase 1, there's a nice concessions court on either side of the security checkpoint as you come out. This would be a similar feature for Concourse E. And another view from that same concessions court, this one looking right down the concourse, so you can see that in the background. And then we continue to travel. So this is once you've entered the concourse and what it looks like, again, looking down towards the end. And then another view a little further down the concourse. So that is what the facility looks like for the 8-gate project. And then outside the building, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. A lot of additional taxiway, taxi lane, and apron that will have to be added to support the aircraft for the expanded terminal. Also want to point out these aircraft that are in red that you see around the terminal complex, those are the Group 5 or very large aircraft gates. So as we were just talking about before, as the industry starts to trend towards larger aircraft, we want to make sure we have enough gate positions to handle them. And with 5, this handles the projected demand through about 2036, actually a little more than we need through 2036. And then on the land side or road side of the terminal, There's some improvements that will be needed as well. So on the departures level, the upper deck of the roadway, you might have noticed that today there's a couple of areas that have notches out of the bridge deck. And so really what's needed to provide the capacity for the upper level roadway through 2031 is just to fill in those notches. And so that's what we plan to do on the departures level. On the arrivals level, today what we have is 4 public lanes where people pick up passengers from bag claim, and then a median in the middle, and then as you know, there's 3 lanes on the outside that are used for ground transportation, shuttles, taxis, that sort of thing. So that's the existing concept. But as you know, it's getting pretty congested even today. So as we continue to grow, we know that we have to make improvements to continue to provide passenger, good level of passenger service. So one of the initial concepts we came up with was adding another curb, an outer curb that, and pushing the ground transportation lanes even further out so that they'd be immediately adjacent to the rental car service building. And then we would convert or add 2 more public lanes to the existing outer curb. Now this certainly provides the capacity that we would need, but it has a lot of challenges. And you see these notes on the image show what some of those challenges are. You've got all these columns for the existing upper level that really you can't move. You can't, and there's not enough room in between them to weave traffic in and out. You've got constraints like this. Having 2 public curbs is a bit confusing because the public doesn't really know, where am I supposed to go? Having additional curbs means more crossing of the road, and that's potential safety concern. So we're trying to balance all of these constraints and come up with a concept that will still work and provide the capacity we need. And so the current recommended concept is that we flip the operation and we convert the inner lanes, the ones that are immediately adjacent to bag claim, to our ground transportation lanes. And this is where the shuttles, taxis, Ubers, that sort of operation would pick up passengers. We don't need all 4 of the lanes, so we would narrow that to 3 lanes and widen this outer curb. And then we would expand what is currently the ground transportation lanes to a total of 5 lanes, and those would be for the public. Now this has a lot of benefits in terms of our design objectives. And I also wanted to point out that this is not an uncommon concept. Here's a list of airports that in Florida and elsewhere that use this same concept for their landside operations. So we think this is a good concept, and that's what we're moving forward with in the design at this point. There's a lot of important elements that go along with the project. One of them is the baggage handling system. And so the baggage handling system that will be installed in Concourse E actually serves 2 pretty important functions. The first is to handle the bags for the passengers who are actually traveling through Concourse E. But second of all, we're providing interconnectivity to the existing baggage handling system, and that's going to give us some additional capacity for that system, better resiliency, redundancy, and so, and in effect, will increase the capacity and duration of viability of that existing baggage handling system that serves, B, C, and D concourses today. We're doing things like studying the lighting in the terminal and the glare. So this is an example of a glare study that we've done, and you can see locations where, depending on the time of year, there's the potential for there to be a little bit too much light and the potential for glare. So we're studying, how do we handle those with different treatments, possibly dynamic glass and other things, to make sure that we maintain appropriate light levels in all parts of the terminal. Air conditioning. We know how important that is here in Southwest Florida, and so, a big part of this project is making sure that our chiller plant has the capacity we need to serve the expanded terminal. And initially, we thought we were going to have to possibly expand that plant or even build a second one. We've actually found a way by replacing the existing chillers, which are nearing the end of their service life anyway, replacing those chillers with larger capacity chillers that we can actually use the same chiller plant that we have today to serve the needs of the terminal with Concourse E added. So here's where we're at in terms of, at 50%, what do we have ahead of us? Well, we've got a lot of coordination with airlines, who's going to move and how do we accommodate all of their needs in Concourse E, as well as what airlines might move around in the existing terminal. There's a lot of coordination with TSA, both in terms of the baggage handling system as well as the screening checkpoint. We've got coordination with FAA and FDOT in terms of, design standards as well as the grants, because they're going to be paying for part of the program. And then just a lot of close coordination with the construction manager and developing detailed phasing plans, schedules, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of work left to do. And of course, everybody wants to know how we're doing in terms of the budget. Well, we said that the target budget for the 8-gate project was $620 million. Our current estimates are higher than that. That's not unusual for this point in the design process. So we've got a lot of work to do in terms of finding ways to, are there things we can eliminate? Are there things that we can reduce, or possibly things that we just defer to the next phase and still make everything work that we need for the 8 gates? Schedule-wise, you can see we're planning to have the design complete early in next year and go through a process of procurement of the various packages of work through next year so that you can award the construction contract by the end of the year. And a target completion date for construction then would be in late 2027. So that's where we're at in terms of the 8-gate initial project. Now I'll walk through some of the elements associated with the additional 6 gates. So to give you some context of what that means, this little red dashed line kind of shows where we would terminate the concourse for the 8 gates. And what you see here is what we refer to as the head house. And that head house has an additional 6 gates around it. And this image from inside the head house shows what that feature's like. So you can see the concourse in the background here. And so it has hold rooms around the perimeter with a nice area for concessions in the middle. And it's a very attractive place for passengers. So it's going to be a nice feature to add to the concourse once we get to the additional 6 gates. And then I'm going to go back to the roadways again. And we've talked before about how we're going to add 3rd level pedestrian bridges to not only to serve the new concourse from the parking garage to Concourse E, or the terminal for Concourse E, but also to the 2 existing main doors 2 and 5. So here's an image of what we see those upper level pedestrian bridges look like. And another image, this kind of focuses on how they incorporate into the terminal building itself above those main doorways. And then inside the building, there's a few features that have to be added to make those work. And it's a balcony area above the entrance doors. And from those balconies, you have escalators as well as elevators and a stairway for passengers to be able to move up and down between the upper level pedestrian bridge and departures or arrivals level. And then I showed you the image before of what the airside would look like with 8 gates. When you go to the additional 6 gates, there's an area here of additional taxiway and apron that has to be constructed, some additional taxiway here. And I'll point out again that we now have a total of 7 parking positions for the large aircraft. At one point, we were focusing on 8. It turns out the forecast demand through 2041 is actually only for 6. So the 7 positions actually gives us 1 more than we think we're going to need. So we feel good about that at this point. And then what you're going to see here on the screen are some passenger flow models that we've done just to make sure that we've got everything sized right for the passenger demand. And this is modeling the passengers in 2041. So this is not only after the 8-gate project and the additional 6 gates for the head house, but if you remember, there's additional 5 gates that can be added to the concourse beyond that, that gets us all the way out to 2041. And so we've tested the facility for that passenger demand. And as you can see, you know, the passengers queuing up, there's plenty of room in the security queue. We wanted to make sure that we had the right number of elevators, the right number of escalators. And of course, the timestamp up here, you might have noticed that this is kind of that midday peak that we always experience in March, in this case of 2041. So it's going to be a comfortable space, very efficient for the passengers, and we feel good that we have the right amount of space and vertical transportation incorporated into the project. Here's a similar model for the same time frame for the existing part of the terminal. Once you have the current project complete with the consolidated checkpoint, you can see these white platforms are simulating those upper level pedestrian bridges. Again, this was just to make sure that with the addition of those bridges, we have the right elevators, escalators, and that everything is going to flow smoothly. And you can see it works very, very well, even through the peak demand of 2041. So what does the 6-gate project look like in terms of cost? It's not as far of a gap between the target and the cost estimate, but we still do have some cost reductions to do in that phase as well. Schedule-wise, it's not as clear because it's going to be based on, you know, funding and that sort of thing, but we definitely have a path to get there. And that's really the presentation that I had today, so look forward to any questions that you might have.
All right, Commissioner Greenwell.
Question, on the drop-offs, it showed if we switch the lanes all to the outside, wouldn't that cause us a problem with rain, you know, dropping passengers off in the rain, not being covered?
That's an excellent question, and I wanted to go back to kind of what things look like today and point out that, I don't know if there's a graphic. Doesn't really show it, but on this little part of the roof that sticks out, it covers really only the first lane of traffic. And so we have a similar scenario on the lower level where this existing roadway structure actually sticks out over that proposed outer lane. So it's a very similar condition to what we have today. Now, if that becomes a big enough concern, you could obviously look at adding, you know, some sort of additional canopy structure to protect more of the traffic. But we're really creating a condition that's pretty similar to what you have today in front of the terminal on the upper level.
And if I could just, Mr. Chair, if I might just add, so the drop off on this, which is the upper level, so when you refer to the drop off, that's really not changing. The second level
is pickup.
That's the pickup.
Okay.
And that's where the big changes are happening. So what Darren was describing is, yeah, you'll have some cover in those initial lanes, but yeah, the outer lanes will not be covered.
And in pickup, they have time to wait. Where on drop-off, they need to get to the gate to schedule, so I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, I had them backwards.
No problem, no problem, yeah.
And I don't like to get wet my hair.
Well, I understand.
That's not good.
Right,
Doesn't
Cecil
work on
knows.
Doesn't work on this end of the dais, I'm sorry.
What other questions do we
I
have?
have one.
Yeah, Commissioner
Darren, if
Pendergrass.
you could go back to slide number 11 or 12, I think it's 11 or 12. It's going to be inside after the the TSA checkpoint. Yeah, go back one up. So you were saying after the go up to like 11 or 12.
Okay.
I think you were saying there was some areas, a lot of area there after you go through pre-check for people to gather their belongings. One thing I've noticed from traveling, I remember doing this with Brian and Carol and Ben. Once you come through there, people usually need a place to put their shoes back on. For example, women sit there, put their shoes on. Men, we have to take our belts off. So are they gonna have a type of concession area there for people to have like a place to put your bags? You see this happen when people, they can't put the bags down, and you can't leave them on the track. You take your bags, but meanwhile you're carrying your shoes, you're carrying your belt. I see there's like a little seating area. You don't want people to obviously congregate there, but that type of, I've seen it before, and I'll bring it the next meeting where, when I went to the show last year in Frankfurt, they have areas where you could put your stuff down just for a short period of time, just to put your stuff down, you could put your shoes back on, and you also put your belt back on and gather your belongings. Are you looking for that, or is that be later and more of a furnishing thing?
So exactly. This area is designed to accommodate that, and there's plenty of room there for it. We've shown some seating in here, which would be, the right place to be able to put your shoes back on, that sort of thing. But we can certainly add more of those types of features or little tables or anything else
There's
to.
a lot of, and I saw some of those last year, and I'm gonna bring that information, that in the future I'll provide the staff, with different areas, different things you could do, different shape than that, we more comfortable and more efficient to put your stuff down on and get
Right.
your belongings and move on to the next section of the concourse.
Yeah, we've got a lot of flexibility as to what furnishings we
There's a lot of
decide
room,
to put in
that's
there.
good. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sandelli?
Beautiful design, and we'll continue to tweak it. Two things. One is, what is that needs gonna be for TSA personnel? We're gonna have to increase TSA personnel. Are those people available? Do they need facilities in the, here to accommodate changing and so on and so forth? So, that's the first question. Second thing is, I think it was my last trip to Denver, but they have multiple stacking lanes. There's always somebody, seemed to be somebody, if I recall, out in those middle lanes, so they can direct you. Well, you have to go over one more lane or so on and so forth. So we can have some additional help outside. And I'm just thinking people-wise to service and keep people moving. And that may or may not be an issue for right now.
Steve, do you want to address the, those two questions, please? Thank you.
So from a TSA standpoint, there'll be some efficiencies, but you will still need some additional employees. So when we look at the entrances for what we're building right now, you have right here and right here. So where our staff, the red vests, are currently on all three, we'll be able to consolidate them and provide some better hands-on throughout the atriums here, as well as in the new facility. So from a flow standpoint, I think we'll be able to be a little bit better hands-on with some direct interaction. Whereas now we have to intercept them as they're walking back and forth. We'll be able to provide a higher level of customer experience by being able to capture them as they walk in right into the atrium and into the consolidated checkpoint, much like we'll be able to do in the new concourse.
Yeah, I always think in terms of, are there personnel available, number one. Number two, they're probably not the highest paid people in the marketplace, so how do we take care of where they live and so on and so forth? So it's just a long-range plan, just trying to think through the operational side.
Yeah.
And then the issue I brought up, I think it was in Denver, once you start crossing multiple lanes, it can be confusing. There's a rental car out here, there's a, bus to the hotel over here, so on and so forth. If I recall, though, they had people outside, and they were very helpful in helping you, one, travel safely between the islands, but also making sure you're not fumbling around out there.
Right, and that's part of the reasoning. What was the slide? Was the
Go to the roadway.
Yeah.
TSA agents are employees or? No,
TSA.
they're US government, right?
Right. So to your question, with going back and forth, and with some of the benefits of this configuration. Okay, get the pointer back here. When we go to this, your primary traffic or passenger traffic is going to be underneath. And when it is underneath, we can control the speed of those vehicles because they're ground transportation, they're regulated. We can put our employees in those lanes much like they are today and better control that flow through there. When they come over, it also gives us more curb space. I think it was, double 16 feet or so of curb space in here. So your passenger flow linear up and down will be better. So from a throughput standpoint, with people being able to come around, line of sight, a little bit better visibility, wider pathways for people to process through. The goal and the intention is to provide that space so they can see their passengers, see their vehicles, and get in and out with our assistance in the crosswalks and on the curb. So we'll have our GT staff on the curb as well as some in the crosswalks in conjunction with how we operate today with our police roaming both.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Ruane? Yeah.
Sure. Can you go to the second to last slide?
This one?
No. Back before question. I believe it's 50% design plus 6 gates with dollar amounts and. So Ben, I guess the million-dollar question or multi-million-dollar question is funding availability. So, obviously have some thoughts. Obviously if we want to try to expand different gates, what is our capacity? What are some of the challenges? Could you give us some insight?
Is your question, Commissioner, on going to the 6 gates? Is that
Oh,
what?
so I think we have options in front of us,
Sure.
like any other household, any other business. If we wanted to look at an option, what type of funding may be available and what would be the most prudent to do?
So the only real option we have to move into, going from an 8-gate to 6-gate 8-gate to 14-gate project and getting this thing done at once is really going to come down to what our bonding capacity is.
Right.
At the end of the day. We have a lot of other funding sources that are being applied to this project, and it's well funded from those other sources. But really, the key funding source is going to be our own. It's going to be bonds. So it's going to be working with our airline business partners to make sure that we can provide the proper funding mechanisms through an agreement with them to really move forward beyond our current 8-gate project. And absent that, our bonding capacity would be somewhat limited.
And I guess that's my point is, with the, options are great, but then, how do I pay for it?
Oh, absolutely.
You have an environment right now, Fed indicated today, still sees inflation, still gonna raise interest rates. Certainly Commissioner Greenwell probably knows better than most of us, but construction costs are still obviously aiding into the inflation part. So, before I start to really fall in love with something, it's like go and look for a house. I mean, what can I afford?
Right.
And what available opportunities are for us? And, are we really maybe the opportunity is here and there might be some efficiencies, but it's the cost factors of inflation and interest rates and capabilities. Again, the bond market is not only indicative of what is the price, but then if they feel like you're stretching your capacity, I can recall before anyone was here, when, they did the Red Sox deal, it was a premium paid on that bond to get that covered.
Right. And if we have a lot of factors working against us right now. I mean, interest rates continue to rise. Of course, construction costs have been, if we could back up a few years,
right.
This project at 14 gates is very affordable. It's not today. It's become very challenging. However, the benefits of getting the project done all at once are significant, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing to do. It has to make financial sense, obviously, at the end of the day. And that's what we're working on right now to see if it does. If it doesn't, an 8-gate project is the way to go. And then we work on the 6 gates at a later date. The 8 gates provides us capacity till 2031. And that's March of 2031. Just remember, that's our busiest month. The rest of the year, we have plenty of capacity.
Right.
However, we have demand and economies of scale that can save us a significant amount of money to obviously, if we can get this project done all at once, and it makes financial sense to do that, we would certainly be recommending that, but that's not where we're at today, of course.
And you'll have greater insight, I gather, in the future.
Near
I
future.
mean, yeah.
Near future.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I mean, and again, that's my whole point is there's some opportunities from savings, but are they diluted and or removed and or eliminated because of the tailwinds we're running into with inflation, with interest rates, with, you know, and again, what type of capacity do we have?
Is it worth it?
And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we save X and it costs us 2 times X. It obviously doesn't make sense whatsoever. So
I agree.
it's just a wrong environment. Maybe great for efficiencies, but you know, until we start to see some leveling off, unfortunately, you know, the Fed continues to say that they don't see an environment of stable. I mean, if anything, rising and certainly no tightening in any time, you know, in a while. So it's really expensive to borrow money right now.
Great. Thank you.
Ben,
Sure.
does all of this change at all when the need for a second runway is needed or could be made available?
Does any of what we're planning for today?
Yeah, the expansion and increased
No,
capacity,
no,
so
it
on and so
doesn't.
forth. So what are we looking at again for potentially for a second runway?
That's still planned in the 2040 range in terms of capacity. In terms of when the demand, we would reach the demand capacity. Yeah.
Okay. Any further questions on that? That's good presentation. I enjoyed,
Great.
well, I think,
Thank you.
you know, even just on the design side too, I like that it's gonna look like the existing, you know, terminal does. I don't like when you can go into one part of the airport and you can clearly tell this is the older part and this is the newer part, and it's
Yeah.
kind of hodgepodge. It's gonna be really consistent throughout, so I think I appreciated that you guys paid attention to that. Yeah,
If I
Mr.
may,
Cameron.
will this have an accommodation for clear?
That's a good question. I mean, the lane
Clear and go.
format in both checkpoints has the ability to accommodate that, and then it just becomes a commercial question of whether they want to operate here.
Okay. But I see that service expanding and, especially with some of the airline issues that we're looking at, direct flights and blah, blah, blah. That would be nice to have.
Good question. All right. Well, if there's no further questions then, does that conclude the workshop today?
Yes, sir.
All right. Great workshop. I see no further business before us, so then at this time, we'll adjourn. Thank you,
All right,
folks.
thank you.